What is Europa Universalis 4 and how do you play it? Welcome to the EU4 Beginner's Guide mini-series, where I'm going to be covering the basics of EU4 by approaching and playing it the way a first-time player might, but explaining things along the way. This series has a few different videos focusing on different elements of the game, and each video will be titled in a way that makes it clear what is covered in that video. For instance, we don't reach war until the second video, so if you're only interested in learning more about the way waging war works in EU4, feel free to skip to that video. Additionally, just so you know, I'll be playing the game in a fairly standard beginner's campaign style, trying to show what a new player's first campaign might look like. I have about 3,000 hours in the game and a couple thousand in Paradox's other grand strategy games, but I'll be sticking mostly to basics so that you can hopefully hop into your own campaign using a lot of the stuff in these videos. Additionally, I'm not using any DLC for this campaign, though at different points I will probably mention features added by DLC, so that you can get a feel for what the various DLC packs add if you're looking to buy them in the future. But before we begin, what exactly is EU4? What should you expect from the game in terms of its style of play? Well, there are quite a few differences between it and other strategy games such as the Civilization series. In the Civilization games, you generally start with a civilization at its birth and play until futuristic times and apocalyptic wars. Europa Universalis 4 is very different from that. It is essentially a historical sandbox game. It has a very set window of time, from the 1400s until the 1800s, which does cover a bit of change in the world in that historical time period, but in general, things will follow a very similar trajectory as they do to real life, with some differences caused by the player or just by a random chance with the AI. One thing with this is that Europa Universalis 4 is not balanced in the way that Civ is. Obviously, different civilizations in Civ have different bonuses and leaders, and there's a bunch of variety there. And the same can be said of EU4. Different countries have different starting situations. But in EU4, countries generally have a starting situation that is based historically on the start date in the 1400s. So essentially, if you start as the Ottoman Empire when they're on their rise, their ascendance to power, it's going to be a lot easier than if you started as Albania, a one-province minor starting right next to the Ottomans, who was likely to be conquered by them. You're largely free to choose your own path and goals within each country. You can play as any country in the world, and if you choose to play as any country, you can take it really any direction. Do you want to become a colonial power, or maybe a mercantile empire, more focused on trade? Or maybe you want to become a small but fearsome powerhouse of a country with super high quality troops. You're largely free to work your way towards any of those, although as you can imagine, you're going to probably be influenced by what other nations surround you and those other historical factors. You definitely shouldn't go into this game expecting it to be a 4X game like Civilization. Think of it more as a chance to take a turn controlling a country in this time of great change, trying to make your own path and your own empires, trying to bend history around and change things in a way based on how well you can run your country. Before we hop into the first video talking about the various numbers and screens of the game, what I will say is that the best way to learn the game is to simply play it. Pick a country that seems interesting and just mess around. Your first couple campaigns are probably going to be a little messy, but that's okay. That's how it goes, and that's how you really start to learn the game. I hope that these videos are helpful, but in the end, it's going to be best just to play it and hop right into it. And hopefully you have fun when you do, as this game is a great game that can lead to lots of fun. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to the first part of our Beginner's Guide mini-series of Europa Universalis 4. We're going to go ahead and hop right in so we can start talking about the various systems in the game. which is what largely this first episode is going to be, talking about these sorts of different buttons and numbers and menus and all those sorts of things that are kind of just basic to navigating the game. First off, we have the country select screen, and as you can see, there are a lot of countries that you can play as all across the world. And a lot of them are very different in their play style if you go kind of the expected route, and they're quite fun. It's quite fun to explore different parts of the world, playing as these different countries. As far as starting out, though, you generally want to start in Europe to get a kind of classic experience of how the general progression of the game goes, the general trajectory of the game goes. There are a few countries that are recommended by the game. They recommend Ottomans, Castile, and Portugal as recommended for new players. Ottomans is totally fine. You're going to be pretty powerful pretty early on, so you can kind of take your time to do whatever you want to do. Castile, I don't normally recommend for beginners. Castile actually has quite a bit of turmoil going on and is a bit more complex of a start than the others. Portugal is what we are actually going to be playing here. Portugal is expected to be allied to Castile early on, so you're fairly safe and tucked away in a geopolitical sense. And it gives you some flexibility. You can pursue conquest, or you can pursue colonization and other stuff. And so that's what we're going to be doing here today with Portugal. And all these numbers, we'll talk about what these numbers are at some point, but you don't really need to worry about this at this point. There are some map modes up here. We're also going to talk about those in a moment as we get into the game. We're going to just do normal here. And it's going to load us in. Okay, there we are. Generally, the game will throw this kind of splash screen up to give you some information about your starting situation, some historical context, and it can be interesting to read, but we're not going to worry about that now. Feel free to do that on your own if you're going to play as any country. You can see stuff about religion, government, etc. So once you open the game up and you get to this point, the 11th of November, 1444. You have a lot on your hands here, right? A lot of numbers, a lot of menus, and a lot of buttons ready to be clicked, right? And it can be a bit overwhelming. So we're going to start with the very basics, which is the map modes. There's a bunch of different map modes that you should start with here. I believe I've changed mine slightly, so you might have a different setup here on the top row, and the bottom row might be empty. But in general, these map modes there's quite a few, but a lot of them are not really necessary to be able to play the game. Some of them are helpful, a lot of them are helpful, but not all of them are necessary. As you can see, there's 4 different tabs filled with map modes. Really, you can stay on political most of the time, right? If you want to maybe look at religion map mode to see the different religions around you, trade map mode, those will come in time, right? But political map mode is generally the one that you're going to be sitting on most of the time. And there's obviously also a mini-map here that can be used to kind of navigate around the world a little quicker. So let's go ahead and start with some of the other numbers here at the top. These are kind of your important numbers you want to keep an eye on as the game is ticking on, right? As the months pass, you want to look up here to see what is going on in your country. I didn't explain this in the intro to the game, but this game is essentially a pausable, real-time strategy game. In other words, here, if I unpause it here, you'll see that ships are going to start to move from other countries. Events are going to start firing. We aren't worried about that. And the day ticks up, one at a time, right? It'll tick depending on what speed you have it, faster or slower. But it can be paused at any time. So you can take some time to plan out maneuvers when you're at war and other things. You can stay paused as long as you want. So that's how the general flow of the game will go, ticking up day by day for almost 400 years worth of history, if you choose to play the whole game out, which many people don't. So let's go ahead and begin with these sorts of numbers up here. In general, I plan on giving a little bit of context about how this number is relevant, but I'm not going to go into every single bonus and detailed thing for each of them. In fact, for a lot of them, I don't even know what every detailed bonus is, because it's really not that important. Lots of them, it's just like you either want more of it or less of it, and it's good or bad, depending on what you have, right? So first off, we have, for instance, our money, our treasury, which is normally people refer to them as ducats. I believe that's like a Venetian currency. But yeah, you have your money up here. Early on, you're going to be earning low amounts, but obviously as you get bigger and stronger, you'll have more costs, but also more money that you bring in from trade and taxation. And we'll talk more about those systems later. Your second number is your manpower. Basically, how many regiments can you make? How many new regiments can you make? And also, how much manpower they have to reinforce with. In other words, we have 14,000 troops, which is 14 divisions. Don't worry about all the buttons on the screen right now. We'll get to that later. We have 14 divisions. And if they get damaged in battles, it will take from this pool to reinforce them. Every month it will recover. So that is a very important number. If you don't have any manpower, you shouldn't be going to war. Because then you'll just run out and your army will wither up and die, basically. Sailors is the same thing, but for your ships at sea. So, pretty simple there. Stability is a sort of abstract number that is on a scale, and it essentially just gives you bonuses if it's positive, and malices if it's negative. If we go to, we'll talk about these tabs later, we have a stability slider. It ranges from -3 to +3, and then 0 is obviously neutral. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what the exact things are. You can imagine, more stability means less rebels that are going to spawn, less riots in the street, because people are generally happier. You get more tax and other things. If your people are unhappy, if you have less stability, you're going to have more issues. It's pretty self-explanatory. Same thing with corruption. So corruption is a number that relates to your economy, and can go up over time naturally, but can be fought over time using money. And in general, it just makes things cost more, as you might imagine. Generally not going to be too much of an issue. Prestige is a slightly more... It's a kind of minor system that can definitely be used in a lot of ways, but doesn't necessarily... it's not necessarily something you can control that easily. In general, prestige goes from -100 to +100. It's another sort of slider situation. And whatever you're at, it will have either bonuses or malices. You can see all the effects there. We're not going to get into all of it. Basically, better prestige, better bonuses. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Normally, prestige is one of those things you can get more of from winning battles, winning wars, that sort of thing. And then losing battles, losing wars will lose you prestige. A lot of it is just kind of naturally going to happen over time. You don't necessarily have as much control over it. Lots of events will focus on prestige. Legitimacy, on the other hand, is something that is more important than prestige. You really don't notice legitimacy until you do, in the sense that if your legitimacy is at 100, you get some bonuses and stuff, but you don't necessarily notice them. That's kind of the default state. You want it to be high, and generally it should be high. But occasionally, if you have like a bad succession crisis and stuff, it can drop down, and that can really kind of hurt your country. More rebels will spawn, and everything else can get a little worse. It's one of those things that it also is very hard to actually control directly, but is an important system. And last but not least here, we have power projection. Power projection essentially is if you have enough rivals, which we'll talk about in a bit when we get to diplomacy. If you have enough rivals and you have done stuff against your rivals, you basically just get free bonuses. So it encourages you to kind of work towards defeating your rivals in wars, embargoing them, etc., etc. And that's it as far as these numbers at the top here. We're not going to worry about these guys here yet, these little icons. Probably the most important three numbers up here, though, that aren't part of this top set, are these three here. We start with admin power, administrative power, diplomatic power, and military power. And these numbers, they start by going up to 999. You earn them at a base rate that gets affected by your leader and other stuff. And these numbers are essentially the mana points of this game. This is essentially another type of currency, just like money is. These points are generally used to do a bunch of other actions when you're expanding your realm, and other things. When you conquer new land, you have to spend administrative power to make that land cored, is what the game calls it. If you have a core on something, that means that it's considered to be your land, and you get the full benefit, or most of the full benefit, depending on other things. So when you conquer new land, let's say we went to war with Morocco. We have a port down here, and we probably will go to war with Morocco. Let's say we went to war with Morocco and conquered Tangiers, right? We would then have to spend some of our admin points to make it a core part of our country. Basically to set up our administration there. And that's very important to do. It's necessary to do, because if you don't do that, you'll have rebels, and additionally, you can only have so much uncored land, because it adds to your overextension, which we'll get to in a bit. Diplomatic power can be used similarly, except with vassals. If you have vassals and you want to integrate them into your country, diplomatic power is how you would do that. And so it's very important as well. Military power doesn't have as many uses for that, but it generally is just used for increasing your technology and for recruiting new generals and other types of things. Speaking of, all three of these are used for the most important thing that they're related to, which is technology. As the game progresses, every 15 years or so, there will be new technologies that are unlocked, and you have to spend a lot of these points, actually, to unlock them. For instance, the first level costs about 600 power points from each type, right? So a lot of the early game is going to be, you start a little behind, and you're going to kind of need to catch up to the curve of technology progressing. And so that's the most important kind of use of these power points. Technology is very important, to the point where if you're a couple military techs behind, you're going to get thrashed by someone who has full technology. So yeah, those are the power points. We'll talk more about what exactly they're used for in the future when we get to other things. But before we do that, we're going to spend a few minutes going over these different menus. I'm not going to go over every single number or button in depth, because obviously there are tons. But I'm just going to go give a brief run-through of what you can expect to see on each of these tabs. For the court, you can see your current leader, their heir, their skill. Their skill here determines how much a month you get from each of these point types. Additionally, you can hire advisors with money to get more per month of each of those types. Very good to do that. Very important. We'll do that in a bit. On this screen, you can see stuff relating to your government. Especially an important part is your accepted cultures, which I'm not going to worry about explaining all right now. But essentially, as you conquer more land of different cultures, the people there are going to be unhappy unless you either convert the culture of that province or you make it accepted. So for instance, in the future, we might, when we conquer more of Morocco, make Moroccan an accepted culture, at which point the people there will be happier, we get more benefit out of it. And that's generally the biggest thing here. The diplomacy screen, I think we're going to come back to in a little bit, but essentially here you can look at other countries' opinion of you. We're going to go into a little more of exactly how to use these systems. Economy is pretty self-explanatory. There's a ledger with the income on one side and expenses on the other. Some of these expenses you can control. For instance, if we have corruption, you can choose how quickly you want to basically pay to eradicate that. Your army maintenance, you can drop your maintenance when you're at peace to save more money, right? And it makes sense to do that a lot of the times. Fort maintenance. We'll talk about forts in probably the next video, but there are forts that you kind of need to maintain, really, to be able to wage war effectively. And so you can see we have a lot of expenses here. But, for instance, when we have these forts, we can mothball them, basically put them on low maintenance mode, which makes them not as effective, or sometimes not effective at all. But lowers our cost. We've lowered our cost a little bit for each of these. And there's other tricks like that you can do. We're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of it right now. On the next screen, we have trade. Honestly, the trade screen is one of the least useful. You're generally not going to be looking at trade from this screen. You can, but it's not particularly necessary. And we'll talk about why later. Technology, we already went over. Don't have to worry about all these numbers. Basically, the higher the technology, the better. And you really need to keep up with the curve. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind and pounced on by your enemies. Ideas, we're not going to talk about now, but essentially, as your technology increases, you unlock these sorts of idea groups, they're called, that let you kind of focus your country. This is how you focus your country. There's a lot of buttons, or not buttons, but little icons here. Don't need to worry about it. The basic idea is, if you're wanting to become a trade empire, you might go with the trade idea group as your first idea group. And they're unlocked periodically at different tech levels. No need to worry about that right now. Missions is something that'll be very helpful for first-time players, because missions give you some goals to work towards, right? So when you look at the mission screen, you can see a lot of goals. If they have a little flag here, that is your country's flag, that means that you actually have it's a unique one to your country. If you have those are normally pretty good. For instance, if we do this one, where we make our navy size be 100% of its limit, then we'll get some bonuses, right? Some navy tradition, some diplomatic power. Again, diplomatic power, getting free diplomatic power. Well, not free, but you know, it's very helpful. That's a very good mission to do, that we will do. Then the next one it leads to is that if we conquer Tangiers, we get claims on the rest of this land up here. And we'll talk more about how that's important in a bit. But we also get 150 admin power. That's a lot. And then 5 prestige, which is fine, right? It's certainly a good thing. And so you can see how these missions kind of are getting you to go in a certain direction, right? Build more ships and then conquer this one province, and it'll let you get access to other things to conquer, right? So this is a very helpful screen early on to kind of go through the progression of what they expect you to do as far as colonizing, conquest, whatever it might be. Decisions and policies don't need to worry about in general. Occasionally there will be decisions that you can choose to do or not do that give bonuses based on different situations. Stability and expansion we briefly went over before with some of these numbers. We have the stability slider, the overextension, which again, basically how much land have you conquered that isn't made a core part of your country yet. All of this is stuff that just kind of sums up stuff that you could go through and look at each province to look at some of these numbers and add it up yourself. It just kind of sums it up here. What is my overextension like? Just go to this screen, right? What is my stability? You can see that up here, but this is where you boost that number. Similarly, war exhaustion, which, as you can imagine, you don't want. The more exhausted your people are from war, the worse things will get in your country. And there's more stuff, but we're not going to worry about it right now. Religion, also not really going to worry about right now. It's fairly tough to change your religion in EU4, outside of a couple exceptions, such as the Protestant Reformation makes it a bit easier to change from Catholic to Protestant. But in general, it is fairly difficult to change your religion, and it can be a bad idea to do that as well, because the more fractured your country gets religion-wise, the more rebels you're going to have, and etc., etc. You can kind of see where that goes. But yeah, the religion stuff, it's not like it's certainly not as flexible as other games like Civ, maybe. In general, your starting religion is going to be what you're going to be the whole game, with again some exceptions. If you want to go Protestant as a Catholic, if you want to create Sikhism in like the northwestern Indian subcontinent and stuff, there's different options that let you switch religion. But in general, you're going to stay the same. And this screen has some of the info about what your religion does. We're not going to worry about the details right now. Military, pretty simple. It shows you your bonuses, what types of troops you have, all this sort of thing, what army leaders and navy leaders you have. You know, we can see that we have an Earl here, who is a general for us, and we have Diogo Gomez, an explorer. We're going to worry about that later. Last but not least, we have estates. The estate system is basically a sort of abstraction of different factions in your country wanting different levels of power. And we're not going to worry about the details of this right now. In general, the important thing is making sure that you, which is the crown land, this white chunk here, needs to be at least 30%. So we're going to go ahead and seize some of the land. Now we don't need to worry about that, and we're not going to worry about that for this series because it's not really a big deal. And that's it. So that's a lot. I know that's a lot. I say that's it like it's a small amount of stuff, but It is a good bit of buttons and everything, but if you can kind of look at that and get at least a rough idea of what each of these menus does, that is going to basically be where a lot of your things that you're going to do are. There's other screens as well. For instance, when we click on a province, right, we see more info about the province, right? But stuff like that we don't need to really worry about as much right now. In general, this is putting us in a good spot to begin. So what are we actually going to do here at the start? Well, we're going to work our way towards war with Morocco. So what do we need to do? Well, we're not going to be able to beat Morocco on their own, likely. Morocco doesn't look that big, but they have a decent population, which we'll talk about how that's kind of abstracted in the game. But basically, they can field a decently large army. They're not going to be super easy to conquer. So, additionally, they have a few vassals. These guys here, Sousse, Tafilalt, and Marrakesh, are all vassals of theirs. So they're really double their size. Vassals, unless vassals get rebellious, which can happen, vassals will help you in wars. And so, essentially, they have about double the army that we see here with this 11 or whatever else they might have. Additionally, we can see that they're allied. If we go to their country on the diplomacy screen, and navigate our way towards Morocco here, which you can do by just clicking on countries when you have this up, we can see that they are allied to Tlemcen, this other country here. And so you can tell that just by judging off of size, which is not always a great measure, but you can tell that just based off size and how many provinces they have and how many provinces their ally has, they're going to be a lot stronger than us on our own. However, we can also find allies. Mainly in our case, we want to ally Castile. Castile is always a good ally as Portugal early on. If you want to be super aggressive and try to conquer them, that's an interesting challenge, but in general, you want to just befriend Castile and use their manpower to your benefit. Additionally, if we go look at Morocco, and this is something again, we'll talk about diplomacy a little now. When we are looking at this diplomacy screen, there's lots of stuff you don't really need to worry about. But what can be useful to look at is to look at this rivals thing. Who are the rivals of Morocco? Well, we are, and Castile is. So basically, we can assume that Castile is going to be more likely to help us because they are rivaled by Morocco. Additionally, enemies means that those countries have rivaled Morocco. So England has rivaled Morocco, and so has Aragon. So Aragon and England might actually be good allies. They might be more willing to ally us, seeing as they have reason to dislike Morocco. And what we can do to even make this better is that if we click this button here, too few rivals, it'll show us that we actually need to set our rivals, right? We can see that other countries have rivaled us, Tunis, Tlemcen, and Morocco. But we can rival them back, so let's do that. We'll rival Morocco, Tlemcen, and I'm actually not going to rival Tunis. I want to rival Granada for the last one. Granada's right here, right? I'll explain that in the future. But, yeah, now that we're rivaled to them, we need to find a way to get to war with them. It's going to be a little bit before we're actually ready to go to war, but we need to start preparing now. Our first conquest is going to be of Moroccan land. What we're going to do here, and there are lots of buttons here, lots and lots of diplomacy actions. Most of these are not really relevant right at the start. The important one that we're going to do here is, well, let's say we wanted to ally Aragon. Unfortunately, they don't really like us enough to do that. So what we're going to do in the meanwhile, while we're preparing, is hopefully get them to ally us by improving relations with them. You basically have, at the start of the game, most countries have 3 diplomats that you can see in the outline up here, and then you can see what they're doing up here. Most countries start off with either 2 or 3 diplomats, and essentially your diplomats can be sent out to do all these things, offer alliances, etc., etc. The relationship improvement is one that will be ongoing, so one of our diplomats is going to be tied up for a while, but that's okay. Another one of our diplomats is actually going to be tied up by trying to get us a claim. One important thing that a lot of new players don't realize is that in this game, you can't just go around declaring war on everyone for no reason. In other words, if I go over here to Morocco, declare war, it takes me to this screen. However, we have no valid casus belli, no reason for war, literally. We don't have any war justification. And so if we were going to declare this war, we would get a -2 hit to our stability. Remember, it only goes from -3 to +3. That's a big hit. You don't want to do that. We get war exhaustion right away, and we get a bunch of aggressive expansion. I talked about this briefly before. Aggressive expansion is one of those things that is, if you conquer a lot of land at once, countries will start to get angry. They'll be like, yo, why are you conquering all this land? This is worrying. You're being too aggressive at conquering your neighbors, our neighbors, right? And basically, there is a map mode for this, the coalition map mode. Right now, we have 0 aggressive expansion because we haven't conquered anything. You essentially want to make sure that it stays below 50. Countries that are closer will care about it more. Further away countries won't really care. But even still, 49 aggressive expansion just for declaring the war is a lot. Because then keep in mind, we're also going to be getting more aggressive expansion when we finish the war, because we're going to conquer land. Conquering land is the main way that it goes up. And so if we did this, it would be pretty bad. Basically, everyone around us would hate us for declaring war without justification. So how do we get to war then? How do we get a justification? Well, under the covert actions option, we can fabricate a claim. And fabricating a claim basically means we're laying claim to some land, fabricating documents saying, oh, we have a legal right to this land, just like was done historically. So, fabricate claim. Well, we can't fabricate claim yet because we need a spy network of a certain strength. What you want to do then is you want to do the build spy network button, which, just like improving relations, it will tie up a diplomat. But once this reaches a size of 20 for our first claim, then we can make a claim and get to war. And you can see it's going up by 1.84 a month. So, you know, about a year, 12 months, should put us at 20 strength, which will let us get a claim on one of their provinces. So yeah, that's what we're going to do here. We're going to go ahead and start going through time here, letting some time pass as we are essentially working on trying to get more allies and working on getting a claim there. This is where up at the top, that sort of noise and this button appearing is basically if other people offer you things, right? We click on this and it'll tell us what it is. Castile basically wishes to marry us. I haven't talked about marriage, but beyond alliances, there are royal marriages for Catholic countries and other countries too. Depending on your religion, there's other effects with it. We're going to accept it. Generally, you want to accept it if it's from an ally or someone you're already allied with. You might as well, in general. It is possible to inherit the thrones of other countries, and it's unlikely. It's a bit complex. I'm not going to get into all those details. But you can imagine that through marriage, you can spread your dynasty to other countries and gain power that way. We're also going to marry Aragon. And we'll marry England as well. Having more marriages is generally a good thing, if you can afford it. However, and this is a good time to bring this up, if you hover over diplomatic power, there's other ways to see this too. But if you hover over diplomatic power, you can see we're at 3 out of 4 diplomatic relations. Alliances, marriages, other stuff counts for that. And you really don't want to... Sorry, I'm just going to lower the effect volume. You really don't want to go over that number, because for every relation over 4 that you go, your monthly increase of diplomatic power in this case, will go down until you can get negative, and that is not a good thing, because then you're never going to get technology, you're never going to get anything like that. So you got to be very careful picking your allies. So, while we're going here, I'm going to do some basic maintenance stuff just to get us ready for war. I'm not going to really talk about exactly everything I'm doing here because we're going to talk about warfare in the next video, which we're probably going to wrap up this video in just a moment and then wait for that one. So, here, we're going to build a cog, which is a transport ship. We're not going to worry about that, explaining that right now. You can see lots of times if there's important world events that happen, you'll get little pop-ups like this. So France is telling us that Maine, or Mine, I don't know actually, is being surrendered. And basically, this is lead up to the end of the 100 Years' War, right? The end of the 100 Years' War happens at the start of this game, basically. And so that doesn't have anything to do with us directly, but the game is letting us know. And you can see how that might affect us indirectly. England is our ally. If they get attacked by France, we would be called in to defend them. That's one thing I didn't mention before, but defensive allies are obligated, or at least very strongly expected, to defend their allies. So that's why when I attack Morocco, their ally is going to defend them. We can actually look at the numbers for how likely they are to accept. And when it says likely, the game says likely, but basically if it's green, they will, and if it's red, they will not accept. There's no actual roll or chance. It literally is just, if the green number is higher, they're going to accept. Right? So you can see that, like, there are some factors mitigating their desire to join the war, but they really want to join the war overall, and so they will. Defensive allies almost always will join to defend people you attack. As the player, you don't have to join your allies if they get attacked, but there are penalties for declining. Whereas on the attack, if we attack people, we can see that Castile is willing to join us on our attack, and so is England, but they're both kind of just barely willing to join. Offensive allies are much less likely to be all in on the idea of fighting these wars. And yeah. And I think, yeah, that's where we're actually going to wrap up this video, because next video we're going to pick up talking about getting prepared for war, declaring war, and all those sorts of parts of the game. I know there's a lot of information in this video. It's totally going to take a while to get used to all these buttons and things. Most of these numbers, however, don't really matter at first. Generally, as long as your money's going up and your manpower is not zero, you know, you're probably fine. There's a lot more to pick up on, but it'll come with practice. So thank you for watching this first part of this mini-series. The second part will be up very soon if it isn't already. At the same time as this one. And yes, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe, or just even share this video if it has been helpful. And in the next part, we will continue with our Portuguese campaign.